America is once again poised to sell arms to the Middle East. The New York Times has reported that Washington is about to lift restrictions on the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia. Many claim that this is because they want to give the Israeli-Arab alliance a military advantage over Iran. If that's correct, far from being a noble gesture, it strongly suggests a continuing American commitment to the use of military aggression abroad, particularly in the Middle East. Since June 2015, Israel and Saudi Arabia have both bombed and killed thousands of innocent civilians in Gaza and Yemen. This evidently raises questions about the wisdom of selling weapons to these regimes. There's also an apparent hypocrisy in the situation. The US has recently been part of an historic accord with Iran based on trust over Iran's nuclear program. Yet Washington's willingness to arm Iran's enemies hints at bullying. Let's remember the new agreement outraged politicians in Israel and the US Republican Party, both these groups making claims that Iran has military aims for its civilian nuclear program, despite a total absence of evidence to back up these claims. So is the sale of arms to Arab dictatorships noble or evil? Can Israel and Saudi Arabia ever be trusted with weapons? And is America breaking the principle of trust by seemingly bullying Iran? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. And we began with this. As we've heard, the New York Times has reported that Washington is about to lift restrictions on the sale of weapons to Arab dictatorships, such as Saudi Arabia. What's the American public's reaction to this news? Here's what we found out.
Well, we make our friends in very ambiguous ways because we have so many enemies. That's my reaction.
Well, I think it's important to do that. The Middle East is kind of a conflicted place, so I think anything that we can do to help make that a better place, we should do.
The reaction is that any kind of sanctions are, as far as I know, are actually technically an act of war. So if it's okay for us, it should be okay for anybody.
You should keep the restrictions on, but it's more complicated than just, restrictions. Like, there's a lot of politics involved in all the international relations, so.
It's always been like that. It's been always under the table. It's no news, really, for people who know what's going on.
I was unaware of the news, but I guess I'd oppose any sale of weapons anywhere, really.
The weapons are there. They're still going to have their hands on it, no matter what they try to do. Either they get it from somebody in America or they get it from another country. So ain't no way they're going to stop the weapons.
I don't follow the news. I don't really know.
I think we should just get out of everyone's countries and not help anyone but ourselves.
I don't think that we should fault them for building weapons and then we're funding them. That makes no sense to me.
It's barbaric. If you ask me, it's honestly it's a modern day barbarianism, which is disgusting.
With the threatened lifting of restrictions on sales of weapons to Arab dictatorships in the region, we invited our experts to give their reaction.
As far as Saudi Arabia spending power on arms, they're very powerful. They spend over $80 billion a year. This is a massive budget, and the American arms industry is interested to have this client and sell their product to Saudi Arabia. As far as the current situation, it seems like they have announced they're stopping any military action on Yemen. That was what I read a few days ago, which hopefully, if that continues, that would bring some stability to Yemen.
Well, if it is true that the US plans to relax arms export licenses and rules, I think it's probably a reflection of something which has developed over quite a long time. It's pretty clear that the US can't conduct itself in the way it has recently in the Middle East anymore. It can't have another Iraq or another Afghanistan or a mass military deployment, but it still maintains interest in the region. So selling arms to places like Saudi Arabia, the Arab dictatorships, and Israel is another way of influencing what happens in the region remotely, and this is part of a broader strategy which involves commerce, by which they mean arms sales, and also involves things like drone operations, special forces operations, private military companies operating in the region. And so despite the shift, the tactical or strategic shift even, they still have interests in the area and they will continue to pursue them.
The newspaper report claims that the US wants to sell weapons to Arab dictatorships in order to give the Israel-Arab alliance a military advantage over Iran. Is this action noble or evil? We put that to the public.
I mean, it's not going to help much, so I wouldn't say evil either, but it's just more in the interest of one country over the other, so it's not really going to help the situation at all.
I would lean evil.
Why?
Because we need less weapons, less war, less conflict.
Well, obviously it's evil. The U.S. economy is based on weapons. They produce weapons, they sell weapons. That's how they get their money, so it's only natural that they do that, regardless of what they say, you know, to the cameras.
Evil. Because they don't want, America don't want it to look bad. They don't want no dirt on their name. So they rather give them the guns and let the other countries go to war with each other.
It's not neither.
What is it?
It's a matter of American interests in relation to the balance of power in the whole Middle East.
I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think using weapons to give anybody an advantage is ever a good idea. I don't think that's the way to do it.
It's the military-industrial complex. It seems like it's far more than just diplomacy. There's probably a lot of backdoor dealing going on, a lot of arms dealers, and the industrial complex in general is involved in that. So it sounds like a lot of money's involved. It doesn't sound like it's about policy at all.
I don't really watch news, but when I hear things like this, it's like losing hope in humanity itself and people. You know, I feel like people should really have a voice over these things versus government and the Democratic, Republican, whoever, you know.
That's evil, because then they can use the same weapons to commit a war on us, and then we're left, you know, funding our own enemies. I don't think that's very smart.
Everything we do is pretty evil, I'd say.
What can our experts say about how noble or evil the sale of weapons to Arab dictatorships really is? Here's what they said.
It's been around 38 years when the relationship between Iran and USA has been hostile, and of course US would be continuously acting to undermine Iranian political and military strength, and that is of course by supporting the Middle East dictators, by providing them arms, so that this would give them more possibly political strength, whereas in my opinion this is not directly related. A very strong army does not always have a strong political power within its own country, or in broader sense in the Middle East.
So the question of is it evil or noble that the US are planning to relax arms controls policy is a funny one, because of course there is a moral angle to this. There is a right and a wrong to it, but I think we have to try and understand it from their perspective. And their perspective isn't moral, it's about realpolitik. They have interests in the region and they want to pursue them, and they'll do that by whatever means is necessary. So while for us, the people on the ground, or certainly the people in the Middle East who are affected by these kinds of sales, of course the moral issue is very important. We have to see it in those terms, in strategic interest and realpolitik. To truly understand it, we have to pan out and look at it and sometimes abstract the ethics.
Given that Israel and Saudi Arabia have bombed and killed thousands of innocent civilians in Yemen and Gaza in the last 10 months alone, can they ever be trusted with weapons? That's the question we put to the American public.
Again, it's a difficult thing to really comment on because weapons are deadly. So to say whether or not we could ever trust a nation or two nations again is, I don't know. It's like the leadership is always changing. So, I mean, and it's not just one person. It's like a whole council of people. So, I can't say for sure.
They shouldn't be.
Can you expound a little further?
As long as a country or a people or any sect of a military, body is found to be guilty of those kind of war crimes, which includes the United States, we shouldn't trust them. We shouldn't even trust ourselves.
Yes, nations nowadays need weapons.
No. But that's not America's call either, That's a United Nations call. It's not one country's call to trust or not trust another country with weapons.
They shouldn't be trusted with weapons. Because when weapons involved, then that's when hatred comes involved. And that's when money and evil and, people want to protect what belongs to them. Like America, they want to take certain stuff that don't belong to them, so they have to protect themselves with weapons.
No, not at all. I don't think that they should ever be funded or they should be blessed with any kind of weapons if they have no mercy on innocent civilians.
They shouldn't, and we shouldn't fund it. The U.S. should not, subsidize, especially to the level it does, Israel's armaments.
Can you talk more about that?
I just think that so much of the reason we're in a lot of the hot water we are is because of our relationship with Israel. We don't get as much back as we put into that relationship, it seems.
With a large and rising death toll in Gaza and Yemen, thanks to Israeli and Saudi Arabian military action, can these countries be trusted with military might? We asked our experts.
Can Saudi Arabia and Israel be trusted with weapons like these? Well, it's an interesting question. I don't think, according to their track record, they can. I think I'd extend that same view to the US and Britain, because what we're talking about really here is huge destructive power, military force, armed force. And that only has two functions. That is to kill people and destroy things, and that's why things like arms regulations are in place to stop those things happening. But I think, again, in a sense, we have to abstract the moral question. They probably are going to get these weapons, and we've been selling guns to Israel and Saudi Arabia for a very long time. They already have huge destructive capacity, and they'll continue to use it. So the real question is, what can we do as people, as activists perhaps, as journalists, whatever we are, to try and expose and stop that? That's the real question, because it is going to keep happening until it's addressed properly and proper regulations are in place.
The US has only recently been involved in efforts to find an historic agreement with Iran over its nuclear program. To the American people, that America's plans to now bully Iran militarily is perhaps even a gross violation of that trust. Here's what they said.
Yes, it is mistrust on the US's part, absolutely. We tend to expect other countries to bow down before us when we're the ones who are also involved in a lot of atrocities, avoidable atrocities. This administration, like past administrations, have been involved in totally avoidable atrocities, and we expect other countries to live up to some standard that we don't even live up to on our own. So, yeah, it's ridiculous.
I don't know because I haven't read the news on that specific subject, but I would say if that's the case, kind of, but at the same time, you never know how the situation will turn out, so kind of, yeah.
We'll see how that agreement plays out. I actually support the idea of an agreement with Iran in hopes that it leads to stability, peace in that region.
Yeah, they're gonna, tell them once they get their trust, then they're gonna tell them that they don't qualify for certain arteria, and then that's when they're gonna be at war, and eventually, America gonna go back to war.
Yes, bullying is a violation, but to certain circumstances, we need, to basically demand that way it could be order. That's all I can say for.
I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so at all, because then again, like there seems to be a trust, a bond, for an opportunity like that to actually be pushed. So No, I don't think so at all.
That is a big violation of trust. That's that not only makes the government look bad, it also makes the Samaritans look bad. I mean, if you're really walking around New York, some people actually from third world countries, they actually give you these dirty looks if you're from America, and it's a pretty hectic thing because, you know, me myself as American Samaritan, I have to go through these things sometimes myself. You know, I get frowned upon, and when I speak another language, you know, it's another story too.
Following the historic international trust-based accord over Iran's nuclear program, we wondered if there is a trust-breaking contradiction in America's apparent willingness to now bully Iran militarily. Here's what our experts felt.
So in the wake of the historic, and it is a very historic agreement between Iran and the US, will the US try and confront and bully Iran in other ways? I think it probably will. It's a very important agreement which has recently occurred, but of course the conflict at the core still remains, and I think it will just be pursued through other means until it's resolved, however that will be. And the US has very important interests in the Middle East. It's essential to the US imperial architecture in the region, and so they still have beef, if you like, to be colloquial, with Iran.
Next, we gave the American public a chance to send a message to those Americans who defend US-backed violence against innocent civilians, and also to those who support Arab dictatorships.
That it's difficult for us living here to be able to really accurately tell people in another country that are they're going through different circumstances what to do. Considering we don't live there, we're not involved in their politics, we're not there day to day. Our family members aren't being put in harm's way. So it's I think leave it up to the locals, the civilians, who live there, to make their own calls. Try not to get involved in that debate because we're not informed enough.
That the intention for America being founded in the first place was self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency does not fall, is not proliferated, and it's not alive so long as we are defending violence, regardless of who it's for. If we defend America being violent towards innocent people just because we're Americans, it doesn't hold up. We have to hold ourselves to a higher standard because it's our country.
I would say we should always try and find a peaceful arrangement to anything, so any violence is never helpful. But yeah.
I'd say go travel around the world, hear people, open your minds and really listen to what people have to say about you and how you look from the outside, because unlike what many Americans think here, America is actually the #1 threat to the peace in the world, not Iran, not Pakistan, not India.
They should just stay away from it. Let nothing be public. And let them do what they got to do. But when they make it public, then people want to dictate. What they should not dictate.
But check it fully and be respectful. You know what I'm saying? We're people, they're people too. We have to work out an agreement somehow.
Like, violence is just never the answer.
I say that that's not very smart, and they are very, very, I don't know the word, but that's just terrible. I think the message is they're very terrible people, and that they should never, ever, 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 ever be used to make any decisions that have anything to do with the violence committed on innocent civilians.
Finally, we wondered what message our experts would wish to communicate to those Americans backing Arab dictatorships and defending violence against civilians in the Middle East.
My message to any American who supports military actions in the Middle East is to look at the Middle East situation on more long-term basis, and come to terms with the fact that it's the unnecessary interference, aggression within the political system of these countries which eventually brings more instability and more hostile relationship between the US and these countries, and eventually at some point these hostilities extend to US territory, as it did in the 2001 September event. This is the military sense. It's proved that it's not a logical answer to solve the problem in Middle East. It's best to promote diplomacy, popular governments, and maintain dialogue and political relationship with democratically elected or popular governments in these countries, rather than appointing individuals who are just interested and work in US interest, but who are not, who don't have the popular base, and they have to behave in dictatorial manner. And at one point, this whole political system breaks down, and it will backfire with regards to the policy in the Middle East. So it is worth taking a good look at it and promote democracy in the area and popular governments rather than dictators and arming the dictators.
So what would I say to the people who continue to support violence by the US and the UK, in fact, in the Middle East? Well, I have a personal insight, I suppose, at least in Central Asia, less the Middle East, in Afghanistan. And I think it's important for me to tell those people to explore the issue and to try and analyse it and look past the sheer weight of propaganda, which we hear all the time. And they're always looking for a new enemy. When one fades, so the Iraq and Afghan wars are over, and now it's all ISIS and Russia, and it's important to try and get past that. I say that under the proviso that people also need to understand that there's a section of society in the US, in Britain, who cannot be convinced, who cannot be won. Again, because a lot of them have interest in the region. I'm talking about the establishment and the ruling class in the US and the UK, and there's no point wasting our breath trying to win those people over. At that point, it becomes fundamentally about what we do as people who are interested in peace and peace building and reducing confrontation and basically our own safety, because as we've spoken about, we're talking about serious amounts of armed force being thrown around here. So we really have to kind of self-reflect a little bit and go, how can we oppose our own government's policies about what they do in places like Libya and Iraq and Syria and perhaps in the future Iran, and now with the confrontation we're seeing with Russia as well. So there's a point where it doesn't matter what they think. It's about what we think, and much more importantly, it's about what we do ourselves day in, day out to try and prevent more wars and more confrontation and more deaths.
There seems to be a big contradiction at the heart of American foreign policy. On the one hand, it seeks to seal a deal with Iran over its peaceful nuclear program. On the other hand, it continues to threaten Iran by arming allies of Washington, such as Israel and Saudi Arabia. What does this tell us about America's true attitude towards international agreements? Well, for many, these contradictions point less towards a desire for trust and dialogue, and more towards a continuing commitment to menace and the bullying of Iran, a strategy as cynical as it is dangerous.